Lucy Connelly, she's the wife of a Conservative councillor. Her appeal against the 31-month sentence for putting out an intemperate tweet in the aftermath of the Southport murders has been dismissed. So she will remain in prison. She's not particularly... She's
Let's just have a minute to think about this country, right? This is a mother who has now got 284 days to remain away from her child.
You used the social media platform, then known as Twitter, to publish the following, quote, "Mass deportation now. Set fire to all the hotels full of the for all I care. While you're at it, take the treacherous government and politicians with them. I feel physically sick knowing what these families will now have to endure. If that makes me racist, so be it." The sentence on count one, therefore, is one of 31 months imprisonment.
The entire country just watched the Prime Minister lose his composure live, unfiltered, and inside the Supreme Court. What began as a routine legal broadcast quickly became one of the most chaotic and unforgettable moments in recent British politics, as millions witnessed it unfold in real time. Justice Lucy Connelly was midway through delivering a ruling that would send shockwaves through Westminster. The decision itself was significant, but it wasn't the verdict that stunned the nation. It was Keir Starmer's reaction. Sitting just meters from the bench, the Prime Minister grew visibly tense as the judgment was read. The shift was subtle. At first, a clenched jaw, a stiffened posture, but when the ruling reached its conclusion, the restraint snapped. In a flash, Starmer erupted, his words sharp enough to halt the room. Security moved in. Startled aides exchanged alarmed glances, and the cameras, still rolling, caught every second. Within minutes, the footage was everywhere. Major outlets cut their scheduled programming. Social media exploded with clips, memes, and furious commentary. A constitutional ruling had just been handed down, but the headlines were no longer about the law, they were about the Prime Minister's public loss of control. And this wasn't a random outburst. The path to this moment had been building for weeks. At the heart of it all was a single executive decision, one that had split Parliament, enraged opponents, and even sown dissent within Starmer's own ranks. It was a choice that some saw as bold, others as reckless, and the political pressure it generated had been mounting like steam in a sealed chamber. Today, in the solemn setting of Britain's highest court, that chamber burst. The eruption wasn't just a lapse in decorum, it was a glimpse into a leader under siege, straining against the weight of political crises, public distrust, and a party beginning to fracture beneath him. The verdict is now in the history books, but it's Starmer's outburst that will define the day. And with the clip already etched into the nation's memory, the damage politically and personally may be impossible to undo.
1 month in prison. And I was reminded, by the way, I'll tell you what, Steve, there's a previous Lucy Connelly out there, a guy called Nicholas Robinson. No one ever talks about Nicholas Robinson. Nicholas Robinson was jailed during the London riots back in 2011. And he nicked a £3.50 bottle of water and got 6 months in jail for it. I think there's another example of...
Under mounting pressure to steady Britain's fragile post-Brexit economy, Starmer's government made a move that would ignite one of the fiercest political and legal storms in recent memory. In a bid to fast-track a new trade alignment deal with the European Union, the Prime Minister issued an executive order, one that bypassed full parliamentary scrutiny entirely. No debates, no votes, no messy back and forth in the Commons. Just a signature from the top and a press release declaring it done, inside Downing Street. Allies hailed it as decisive action, the kind of swift, uncompromising leadership needed to ward off economic fallout. But beyond those walls, the reaction was far less forgiving. Opposition MPs called it a power grab. Veteran legal scholars warned it skirted dangerously close to dismantling the checks and balances at the heart of Britain's democracy. Even a handful of Labour backbenchers quietly voiced their unease, alarmed at the precedent it might set. The criticism escalated fast. What began as a heated political argument turned into a full-blown constitutional dispute. Lawyers drafted challenges. Commentators filled airwaves with warnings about executive overreach. The question wasn't just whether the trade deal was wise, it was whether the Prime Minister had any right to ram it through without Parliament's say. It didn't take long for the fight to leave Westminster and land squarely in the hands of the judiciary. A formal case was filed. Its core allegation, simple but explosive: Starmer had acted beyond his legal authority. The Supreme Court took it up without delay, and the assignment landed with Justice Lucy Connelly, one of the country's most respected, most unflinching legal minds, known for her precise rulings and absolute refusal to be swayed by political pressure. She was the last person Starmer's team would have chosen for a case like this. From the moment her name was announced, everyone paying attention knew this wouldn't be a quiet day in court. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test the limits of executive power and, as it turned out, the Prime Minister's own composure.
Darn harsh.
Yeah, I mean, look, you and I use social media. We all send, you and I send bad tweets. Lots of people send bad tweets. It wasn't a bad tweet. It was an illegal tweet. And there were two issues. Firstly, was she rightly convicted? She was rightly convicted, and we know that because she pleaded guilty. That was, she admitted to the crime. And the appeal court were asked to look specifically at a couple of specific grounds for appeal. And the appeal court was unequivocal. It said that the threshold for a successful appeal had not been met and not even come close to being met. And they specifically, I think what was most significant is they specifically dealt with the issue that a lot of Lucy Connelly supporters have been highlighting, which is this idea that she was somehow duped by her brief into accepting submitting a guilty plea.
The courtroom was at capacity, a crush of journalists, MPs, senior barristers, and political strategists crammed into every available seat. Outside, a small crowd had gathered despite the chill, huddled around phones and portable radios, waiting to hear the outcome that could redraw the boundaries of political power in Britain. Inside, the hum of whispered speculation died down as Justice Lucy Connelly entered and took her seat. The cameras were already rolling. Across the country, millions tuned in, some from offices, some from pubs, others from their living rooms, all aware they were about to witness something historic. Justice Connelly began her ruling with the precision of a scalpel. Her tone was even steady, and without theatrics. But the words themselves carried a weight that made the chamber tighten with every sentence. She recapped the arguments from both legal teams, dismantling and dissecting them with clinical clarity. Then, without pause, she reached the heart of the matter. The Prime Minister's executive order, she declared, had not merely pushed the limits of constitutional authority, it had crossed them outright. By bypassing Parliament entirely, the government had acted unlawfully. It wasn't simply a procedural misstep. It was, in the court's eyes, a fundamental breach of the principles that underpin British democracy. And then came the dagger. Ruling went further, accusing the administration of undermining parliamentary sovereignty in favor of concentrated and unchecked executive power. In one line, she cut through all the economic justifications, all the political spin, all the noise, and reframed the battle as one not about trade deals, but about power itself. The implication was clear to everyone in the room, and to the millions watching. The Prime Minister had overreached, and the highest court in the land had just said so. For a few seconds after she finished, the room froze. No whispers, no shuffling of papers, no coughing. It was the stillness of collective shock, as if the oxygen had been sucked out of the air. And then, like glass shattering, the silence broke.
Story, because I think, to me, I'm fascinated by this. She, of course, was jailed for that social media post inciting racial hatred. She did plead guilty to this. She was sentenced after posting it online following the Southport trip.
Keir Starmer had been seated in the very front row, almost directly beneath the gaze of the presiding judge. His posture was upright, his hands folded, his expression controlled but intense, the sort of positioning that seasoned political observers read as a calculated statement. To some, it was a display of unshakable confidence. To others, a provocation, a quiet challenge to the authority of the court itself. For the better part of the proceedings, he had sat in silence, allowing his lawyers to do the talking. The air was heavy with formality, every cough, every shuffle amplified in the stillness. But when the judgment reached its conclusion, when Justice Lucy Connelly delivered the final, unambiguous blow to his policy, something in him shifted. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't the slow erosion of composure that the cameras sometimes catch in the margins of political defeat. This was sudden, visible, and unmistakable, in full view of the cameras. With the nation watching, the Prime Minister's self-control shouted. What followed was not a muttered objection or a weary sigh. It was a full-throated eruption, sharp, resonant, and loud enough to echo against the wood-paneled walls of the courtroom. The outburst startled even those closest to him, aides who had weathered years of tense negotiations and political standoffs by his side. This was different. This was raw. Starmer's voice carried not just anger, but something deeper, a charge of indignation, frustration, and a hint of personal betrayal. He accused the judiciary of undermining the will of the people, of substituting legal caution for a democratic mandate. Security staff instinctively shifted in their seats, scanning the room. The bench, however, remained still, their expressions impassive. The broadcast feed did not cut away. For a few charged seconds, the highest elected official in the land was visibly, audibly and emotionally unmoored in the face of judicial authority. His voice shook, his face flushed. The atmosphere in the room pivoted abruptly from the measured cadence of legal procedure to something far more volatile, raw political theater unfolding in real time. By the time Starmer sat back down, the damage was already spreading. The clip, brief, dramatic and politically explosive, was on its way across the airwaves. Within minutes, newsrooms were replaying it on a loop. Political commentators didn't wait for transcripts. They didn't need them. The footage spoke for itself. Parliament was in chaos almost immediately. Opposition MPs called emergency meetings while backbenchers huddled in corridors, trading hurried whispers. Even senior members of Starmer's own party were blindsided by the sheer force and public nature of his challenge to the judiciary. It wasn't just the fact that he had disagreed. Leaders have done that before. It was how he had done it. In open court, on live television, with no attempt to temper his tone. Nigel Farage, never one to waste political opportunity, seized the moment with a press conference that felt suspiciously ready-made. He denounced the Prime Minister's conduct as a direct assault on the sacred balance between the executive and the judiciary, framing it as proof that Labour leadership could not be trusted with the machinery of government. He called for a motion of no confidence, saying Starmer had crossed a constitutional line from which there could be no return. Inside Labour, unease was spreading like ink through water. The left wing saw the outburst as a betrayal of core democratic principles. The centrists feared the optics, how it would play with swing voters, with institutions, with Britain's allies abroad. Meanwhile, Justice Connelly, unmoved by the drama, finished reading her judgment in an even, steady voice, as though nothing out of the ordinary had happened. That contrast, her measured calm against his emotional explosion, amplified the perception of political recklessness. By the end of the hour, hashtags were trending, headlines were screaming, and Westminster had slipped into a state of full-blown crisis. Analysts called it one of the most dramatic collisions between the judiciary and the executive in living memory. Legal scholars lined up on broadcast panels, dividing sharply into two camps. One side applauded the judgment as a crucial defense of democratic guardrails, a reaffirmation of the limits of executive power. The other, including several government advisers and economic strategists, sympathized with Starmer's impatience. Post-Brexit Britain, they argued, couldn't afford the glacial pace of traditional legal processes. The economy was fragile, the stakes high. His push for faster trade implementation, they insisted, was urgent, even if his delivery was ill-judged. But, even among those who agreed with his policy goals, few could defend the manner of his response. The location, the timing, the intensity, all of it clashed with the dignity and restraint expected of a prime minister. 2 hours after the verdict, Number 10 issued a short statement. It acknowledged differences of interpretation between the government and the judiciary, reaffirmed a commitment to supporting economic growth, but offered no apology. If anything, the lack of contrition only fueled the fire. Opposition parties doubled down, MPs sharpened their criticisms, and political pressure began to rise not only from across the aisle but from within Starmer's own cabinet. The shockwaves were not contained to Britain. In Brussels, EU leaders issued carefully worded statements about the importance of judicial independence, diplomatic language that barely masked their concern. In Washington, the U.S. Secretary of State remarked pointedly on the need to respect democratic institutions. Markets reacted with unease, particularly in industries tied to the EU trade deal at the heart of the court ruling. Britain's post-Brexit image, already delicate, now looked unstable. Inside Number 10, the mood shifted from defensive to urgent crisis management. Advisers debated next steps. Some urged a direct address to the nation, others advised silence. A few suggested temporarily delegating certain powers to ease tensions. But one proposal, long whispered in political corners, now emerged openly: call a snap general election. Supporters of the idea argued that Starmer could rally the public against what he framed as judicial obstructionism, bypassing the crisis by seeking a fresh mandate from the electorate. It was a high-stakes gamble, bold, dangerous potentially, career-ending, but perhaps the only path left. No decision had been made, but those close to him described the Prime Minister as restless, pacing the halls, demanding constant updates on public sentiment. He had fought political battles before, but this was different. This was personal, structural, and existential. All at once, what was meant to be a legal ruling on a single policy had exploded into a national reckoning over power, legitimacy, and the very boundaries of leadership. The court's decision had not only dismantled an executive order, it had ignited a crisis of trust. Whether Keir Starmer can recover from this moment, or whether it will mark the beginning of his political downfall, remains uncertain. For Britain, one thing is clear: the political landscape has changed. The question now is not just what Starmer will do next, but how, or if the system itself will absorb the shock.